A Flight of Fact by Rudyard Kipling. Most of this tale actually happened during the war about the year 1916 or 1917, but it was much funnier as I heard it told by an English naval officer than it is as I have written it from memory. It shows what one always believed was true, that there is nothing that cannot happen in the Navy. H. Roman 1000s Gardenia, we will take her name from the herbaceous border, which belonged to the sloops though she was a destroyer by profession, came quietly back to her berth some time after midnight, and disturbed half a dozen of her sisters. As she settled down they all talked about it next morning, especially Phlox, and Stephanotis, her left and right-hand neighbors in the big basin on the east coast of England, that was crowded with destroyers. But the soul of the Gardenia lieutenant in command, H.R. Ducat, was lifted far above insults. What he had done during his last trip had been well done. Vastly more important Gardenia was in for a boiler clean, which meant 4 days' leave for her commanding officer. "Where did you get that fender from, you dockyard burglar?" Stephanotis clamored over his rail, for Gardenia was wearing a large quarmetting fender, evidently fresh from store, over her rail. It creaked with newness. "You common thief of the beach, where did you find that new fender?" The only craft that a destroyer will sometimes not steal equipment from is a destroyer, which accounts for the purity of her morals, and the loftiness of her conversation, and her curiosity in respect to stolen fillings. Ducat, unmoved, went below to return with a valise which he carried onto His Majesty's quarterdeck, and atop of a suit of ratcatcher clothes, crammed into it, a pair of ancient pigskin gaiters. Phlox, assisted by her dandy Dinmont Dinah, who had been trained to howl at certain notes in her master's voice, gave a spirited and imaginary account of Gardenia's return the night before, which was compared to that of an ambulance with a lady driver. Ducat retaliated by slipping onto his head, for one coquettish instant, a gravi-colored soft cloth cap. It was the last straw. Phlox and Stephanotis, who had no hope of any leave for the present, pronounced it an offense only to be wiped out by drinks. "All things considered," said Ducat, "I don't care if I do come along," and the hour being what it was, he gave the necessary orders through the wardroom's tiny skylight. The captains came. Phlox Lieutenant Commander Jerry Marlett, a large and weather-beaten person, docked himself in the armchair by the wardroom stove, with his cherished Dinah in his arms. Great possessions, and much land inherited from an uncle, had removed him from the Navy on the eve of war. 3 days after the declaration of it, he was back again, and had been very busy ever since. Stephanotis, Lieutenant in Command Augustus Hallwell, Rain alias the Damper, because of his pessimism, spread himself out on the settee. He was small and agile, but of gloomy outlook, which a Roman 500 SO earned, he said quite by mistake, could not light. Horse Ducat, Gardenia's skipper, was a reversion to the primitive Marryat type, a predatory, astute, resourceful pirate, too well known to all His Majesty's dockyards, a man of easily injured innocence, who could always prove an alibi, and in whose ship, if his torpedoic swain had ever allowed anyone to look there, several sorts of missing government property might have been found. His ambition was to raise pigs, animals he only knew as bacon in Shropshire, a county he had never seen after the war, so he waged his war with zeal to bring that happy day nearer. He sat in the armchair by the door, whence he controlled the operations of Crippen, the wardroom steward late of Bolitho's traveling circus and swings, who had taken to the high seas to avoid the attentions of the police ashore. As usual, Ducat's character had been blackened by my lords of the Admiralty, and he was in the midst of a hot campaign against them. An able seaman's widowed mother had sent a ham to her son, whose name was E.R. Davids, unfortunately engine room artificer E. Davies, who swore that he had both a mother and expectations. Hams from her came across the ham first, and misreading its address had had it boiled for, and at once eaten by the engineers. Mess E.R. Davids, a vindictive soul, wrote to his mother, who it seems wrote to the Admiralty, who according to Ducat wrote to him daily, every day for a month, to know what had become of E.R. Davids' ham. In the meantime, the guilty engine room artificer E. Davies had been transferred to a sloop off the Irish coast. "And what the deuce am I to do?" Ducat asked his guests plaintively. "Apply for leave to go to Ireland with a stomach pump, and heave the ham out of Davies," Jerry suggested promptly. "That's rather a wheeze," said Ducat. "I had thought of marrying David's mother to settle the case. Anyhow, it was all Crippen's fault for not steering the ham into the wardroom when it came aboard. Don't let it occur again. Crippen hams are going to be very scarce." "Well, now you've got all that off your chest," Jerry Marlett lowered his voice. "Suppose You tell us about what happened at the night before last. The talk became professional ducat, produced certain evidences still damp in support of the claims that he had sent in concerning the fate of a German submarine, and gave a chain of facts and figures and bearings that the others duly noted. And how did your acting sub do? Asked Jerry at last. Oh, very fair, but I didn't tell him, so of course they're hard enough to hold at the best of times, these Makito officers. Have you noticed that they are always above their jobalways thinkin' round the corner, when they're thinkin' at all on our way back? This young merchant o' mine, when id almost made up my mind to tell him he wasn't as big tripes as he looked told me his one dream in life was to fly. He flew all right by the time id done with him. Beaut imagine a sub tellin' one a thing like that, it must be so interestin' to fly. He said the whole North Sea one blooming burgoo of what commenext, and this pup complainin' of lack of interest in it. Fly when I was a sub-lieutenant. He turned pathetically towards the damper, who had known him in that rank in the Mediterranean. There wasn't much flyin' in our day, said the damper mournfully, but I can't remember anything else we didn't do. Quite so, but we had some decency knocked into us. The new breed wouldn't know decency if they met it on a dung fork. That's what I mean. When I was actin' sub, Jerry opened thoughtfully in the Polycarp, the Pious Polycarp 1907, I got 9 cuts of the best from the senior sub for occupyin' the bathroom 10 seconds too long. 20 minutes later, just when the welts were beginning to come up, why no, I was sent off in the gig with a corporal o' marines and a private to fetch the headman of all the pelangas aboard. He was wanted for slavery or barratry or bigamy or something. All the pelangas ducat repeated with interest. Odd you should mention that part of the world. What are the pelangas like? Very nice, hundreds of islands and millions of coral reefs, with atolls and lagoons and palm trees, and all the population scullin' round in outrigger canoes between like a permanent regatta. Filthy navigation. Though Polycarp had to lie 5 miles out on account of the reefs. Even then our navigator was tearin' his hair, and I had an hour's steerin' on hot hard thwarts. Talk o' tortures, you know, we landed in a white lather at the boat steps of the headman's island. The headman wasn't talkin' any at first. He'd drawn up his whole army 300 strong with old Martini rifles and a couple of ancestral 7-pounders in front of his fort. We didn't know anything about his domestic arrangements. We just dropped in among 'em, so to say. Then my corporal of marines, fattest man in the service bar, one fell down the landin' steps. The headman had a prime minister about as fat as my corporaland. He helped him up well, that broke the ice a bit. The prime minister was a statesman. He poured oil on the crisis, while the headman cursed me and the navy and the British government. And I kept wrigglin' in my white ducks to keep 'em from drowin' tight on me. You know how it feels. I remember I told the headman the Polycarp 'ud blow him and his island out of the water if he didn't come along quick. She could have done it in a week or two, but we were scrubbin' hammocks at the time. I forgot that little fact for the minute. I was a bit hotal over the prime minister. Soothed us down again, and by the headman said he'd pay us a state callas a favor. I didn't care what he called it slong as he came, so I lay about a quarter of a mile offshore in the gig. In case the 7-pounders pooped off, I knew the Martinis couldn't hit us at that range, and I waited for him till he shoved off in his state barge-40. Rowers aside, would you believe it, he wanted to take precedence of the white ensign on the way to the ship. I had to fall him in behind the gig and bring him alongside properly. I was so sore I could hardly get aboard at the finish. What happened to the headman? Said the damper. Nothing, he was acquitted or condemned, I forget which, but he was a perfect gentleman. We used to go sailing with him and his peopledancing with on the beach and all that sort of thing. I don't want to meet a nicer community than the Pelangalus. They aren't used to white men, but they're a first-class learners. Yes, they do seem a cheery crowd, ducat commented. Where have you come across them? Said Jerry. Nowhere, but this acting sub of mine has got a cousin who's been flying down there. Flying in all the Pelangas? Jerry cried. That's impossible. In these days, where's your bright lexicon of youth? Nothing's impossible anywhere. Now, ducat replied, all the best people fly. Count me out, Jerry grunted. We went up once, dine a little dog, and it made us both very sick, didn't it? When did it all happen? Horse. Sometime last year. This chap, my sub's cussin' a man called Baxter, went adrift among all the Pelangas in his machine and failed to connect with his ship. He was reported missing for months. Then he turned up again, that's all. He was called Baxter, said the damper. Hold on a shake. I wonder if he's Blue Baxter by any chance. There was a chap of that name, about 5 years ago on the China station. He had himself tattooed all over regardless in Rangoon. Then he got as good as engaged to a woman in Hong Kong, rich woman too. But the pusser of his ship gave him away. He had a regular cinema of frogs and dragonflies up his legs. And that was only the beginning of the show, so she broke off the engagement, and he half-killed the pusser. And then he became a Buddhist or something. That couldn't have been this Baxter, or my sub, would have told me, said Duckett. My sub's a morbid-minded young animal. Masky 18 your sub's mind, said Jerry. What was this Baxter manplain or color reddin in all my pelangas? As far as I can make out, said Duckett, Lieutenant Baxter was flying in those parts with an observer out of a ship. Yes, but what for? Jerry insisted. And what ship? He was flying for exercise, I suppose, in his ship was the Cormorang Diu. Feel wiser, and he flew and he flew and he flew, till between him and his observer and the low visibility and providence, and all that sort of thing, he lost his ship just like some other people I know. Then he flapped about huntin' for her, till dusk among the pelangas, and then he effected a landin' on the water. A nasty wet business landin', that way, Dinah, we know, said Jerry, into the keen little cocked ear in his lap. Then he taxied about in the dark till he taxied on to a coral reef, and couldn't get the machine off. Coral ain't like mud. Is it? The question was to Jerry, but the insult was addressed to the damper, who had lately spent 18 hours on a soft and tenacious shoal off the east coast. The damper launched a kick at his host from where he lay along the settee. Then Duckett went on this. Baxterman got busy with his wireless, and S.O. said like Winky till the tide came and floated the old bus off the reef, and they taxied over to another island in the dark. Thousands of islands, in all the pelangas, Jerry murmured. Likewise reef sherry, ones. What about the reefs? Oh, they kept on hittin' reefs in the dark, till it occurred to them to fire their signal lights to CM by, so they went blazin' and stinkin' and taxiin' up and down the reefs, till they found a gap in one of 'em, and they taxied bung on to an uninhabited island. That must have been good for the machine, was Jerry's comment. I don't deny it, I'm only tellin' you what my sub told me. Baxter wrote it all home to his people, and the letters have been passed round the family. Well, then, o' course it rained all the rest of the night, up to the afternoon of the next day. It always does when you ray in a hole. They tried to start their engine in the intervals of climbin' palm trees for coconuts. They'd only a few buscuits, and some water with M. Don't like climbin' palm trees, it scrapes you raw, the damper moaned. And when they weren't climbin' or crankin' their engine, they tried to get into touch with the natives on the next nearest island, but the natives weren't havin' any. They took to the bush. Ah, said Jerry sympathetically. That aeroplane was too much for M. Otherwise, they're the most cozy, confidential lot I ever met. Well, what happened? Baxter sweated away at his engine till she started up again. Then he flew round lookin' for his ship some more till his petrol ran out. Then he landed close to another uninhabited island and tried to taxi up to it. Why was he so keen on uninhabited islands? I wish I'd been there. I'd shown him round the town, said Jerry. I don't know his reasons, but that was what he wrote home to his people. Duckett went on not havin' any power by that time. His machine blew on to another reef, and there they were, no grub, no petrol, and plenty of sharks. So they snugged her down. I don't know how one snugs down an aeroplane, Duckett admitted, but Baxter took the necessary steps to reduce the sail area and cut the spanker boom out of the tail tassels, or whatever it is they do on an aeroplane when they want her to be quiet. Anyhow, they more or less secured the bus to that reef. So they thought she wouldn't fetch adrift, and they tried to coax a canoe over that happened to be passing. Nothin' doin', their canoe made one bunk of it. He tickled M the wrong way, Jerry sighed. There's a song they sing when they're fishing, he began to hum dolefully. I expect Baxter didn't know that tune, Duckett interrupted. He and his observer cursed the canoe a good deal, and then they went in for swimmin' stunts all among the sharks, until they fetched up on the next island. When they came to it took him an hour to swim there, but the minute they landed the natives all left. Seems to me, said Duckett thoughtfully. Baxter and his observer must have spread a pretty healthy panic, scullin' about all the pelangas in their shirts. But why shirts, said Jerry, those waters are perfectly warm. If you come to that, why not shirts? Duckett retorted. A shirt's a badge of civilization. Never mind your shirts, what happened after that, said the damper. They went to sleep. They were tired by that time. Oddly enough, the natives on that island had left everything standing when they bunked fires, lighted, chickens runnin' about, And so forth Baxter slept in one of the huts. About midnight some of the bold boys stole back again. Baxter heard talkin' just outside. And as he didn't want his face trod on, he said salam that cleared the island for the second time. The natives jumped 3 foot into the air and shoved off. Good Lord, said Jerry, impatiently. I'd have had eating out of my hand in 10 seconds. Salam isn't the word to use at all what he ought to have said. Well, anyhow, he didn't. Duckett replied. He and his observer had their sleep out and they woke in the mornin' with ragin' appetites and a strong sense of decency. The first thing they annexed was some native loincloths off a bush. Baxter wrote all this home to his people, you know. I expect he was well brought up. If he was Baloo Baxter, no one would notice the damper. He wasn't. He was just a simple virtuous naval officer like me. He and his observer navigated the island in full dress in search of the natives. But they'd gone and taken the canoe with Baxter was so depressed at their lack of confidence that he killed a chicken and plucked it. And drew it. I bet neither of you know how to draw fowls, and boiled it and ate it all at once. Didn't he feed his observer? The damper asked. I've a little brother. What's an observer up in the air? I'd hate to think he. The observer was kept busy wavin' his shirt on the beach in order to attract the attention of local fishin' craft. That was what he was for. After breakfast Baxter joined him, and the two of them waved shirts for 2 hours on the beach. And that's the sort of thing my sub prefers to serve in with me. After a bit the Pelingaloos decided that they must be harmless lunatics, and one canoe stood pretty close in and they swam out to her. But here's a curious thing. Baxter wrote his people that, when the canoe came, his observer hadn't any shirt at all. Expect he'd expended it wavin' for succor. But Baxter's shirt was all right. He went out of his way to tell his people, so and my sub couldn't see the humor of it one little bit. How does it strike you? Perfectly simple, said Jerry. Lieutenant Baxter, as executive officer in charge, took his subordinate's shirt owin' to the exigencies of the service. I'd done the same. Proceed. There's worse to follow. As soon as they got aboard the canoe, and the natives found they didn't bite, they cottoned to no end, gave grub and dry loincloths and betelnut to chew. What's betelnut like, Jerry? Grateful and comfortin', warms you all through, and makes you spit pink. It's non-intoxicating. Oh, I've never tried it. Well then, there was Baxter spittin' pink in a loincloth, and a canoeful of Pelingaloo fishermen, with his shirt dryin' in the breeze. Got that? Well then, his aeroplane, which he thought he had secured to the reef of the next island, began to drift out. To see that boy had to keep his eyes open, I tell you. He wanted the natives to go in and mackie-catchy the machine, and there was a big palaver about it. They naturally didn't care to compromise themselves with strange idols. But after a bit they lined up a dozen canoes, 11 to be precise. Baxter was awfully precise in his letters to his peoplian, tailed on to the aeroplane, and towed it to an island. Excellent, said Jerry Marlett, the complete lieutenant commander. I was gettin' worried about His Majesty's property. Baxter must have had a way with him. A loincloth ain't uniform, but it's dashed comfortable. And how did all my Pelingaloos treat Will, said Duckett. Baxter was written home to his people, so I expect he toned things down a bit. But readin' between the lines, it looks as if, and that's why my sub wants to take up flyin'. Of course it looks as if from then on they had what you might call garden off Eden picnics for weeks and weeks. The natives put under a guard o' sorts just for the look of the thing while the news was sent to the headman. But as far as I can make out from my sub's reminiscences of Baxter's letters, their guard consisted of the entire male and female population goin' in swimmin' with twice a day at night. They had concertnative songs versus musicalin alternate. What do you call anti-somethings? Phone, ain't it? They are a musical race. I'm glad he struck that side of their nature, Jerry murmured. I am envious, Duckett protested. Why should the flying corps get all the plums? But Baxter didn't forget His Majesty's aeroplane. He got to tow it to his island o' delights. And in the evenings, he and his observer between the musical turns used to give the women electric shocks off the wireless, and one time, he told his observer to show his false teeth, and when he took him out the people all bolted. But that's in Rider Haggard, it's in King Solomon's mines, the damper remarked. Perhaps that's what put it into Baxter's head. Then said Duckett, or else, he suggested warily, Baxter wanted to crab his observer's chances with some lady. Then he was a fool, the damper snarled. It might have worked the other way. It generally does. Well, one can't foresee everything, said Duckett. Anyhow, Baxter didn't complain. They lived there for weeks and weeks singin' songs together, and Bathan Anno Yescomblin Baxter made a set of dice too. He doesn't seem to have neglected much, he said it was just to pass the time away. But I wonder what he threw, for I wish I knew him. His letters to his people are too colorless. What a life he must have led, women, dice, and song in your pay, rollin' up behind you in perfect safety, with no exertion on your part. There's a dance, they dance on moonlight nights, said Jerry, with just a few banana leaves, never mind, go ahead. All things bright and beautiful finish Ducat, mourned. Presently the headman of all the Pelingas came along. My friend, I hope it was a first-class sportsman, said Jerry. Baxter didn't say anyhow. He turned up, and they were taken over to the capital island, till they could be sent back to their own ship. The headman did him up to the nines in every respect. While they were with him, Baxter's quite enthusiastic over it, even in written to his own people. But o' course there's nothing like first love, is there? They must have felt partin' with their first loves, I always do. And then they were put into the full uniform of all the Pelingalu army. What's that like, Jerry? You've seen it. It's a cross between a macaw and a rainbow-ended mandrill, very tasty. Just as they were gettin' used to that, and they'd taught the headman and his court to sing hello, hello, who's your lady friend, they were embarked on a dirty common sailin' craft and taken over the ocean, and returned to the Cormorant, which o' course had reported missing and dead. Months before they had one final kick-up, before returnin' to duty. You see, they'd both grown torpedobards in the Pelingas, and they were both in Pelingalu uniform. Consequently, when they went aboard the Cormorant, they weren't recognized till they were halfway down to their cabins. And then both captains asked at once. That's where Baxter breaks off, even though he's written to his own people. He's so apologetic to for havin' gone missin', and worried and he's so sinful proud of havin' taught the headman musical songs, that he only said that they had some reception aboard the Cormorant. It lasted till midnight. It is possible. What about their machine, said Jerry. The Cormorant ran down to the Pelingas, and retrieved it all right, but I should have liked to have seen that reception. There is nothing I'd ha liked better than to have seen that reception, and it isn't as if I hadn't seen a reception or two either. The leaf signal is made, sir, said the quartermaster at the door. 12:24 train, Ducat muttered. Can do. He rose, adding, I am going to scratch the backs of swine for the next 3 days' gout. The well-trained servant was already fleeting along the edge of the basin with his valise stephanotis, and flocks returned to their own ships, loudly expressing envy and hatred. Ducat paused for a moment at his gangway rail to beckon to his torpedoic swain, a Mr. Wilkins, a peacetime sailor of mild and mildewed aspect, who had followed Ducat's shady fortunes for some years. Wilkins, he whispered, where did we get that new starboard fender of ours from? Orf the dredger, sir. She was asleep when we came in, said Wilkins through lips that scarcely seemed to move. But our port one come orf the waterboat. We 'ad to overhaul our moorings in the skiff last night, sir, and we're found it on Well, Wilkins, keep the home fires burning, and Lieutenant in Command H.R. Ducat sped after his servant in the direction of the railway station. But not so fast that he could outrun a melody played aboard the flocks on a concertina to which manly voices bore the burden. Moved, heaven knows, whether by conscience or kindliness, Lieutenant Ducat smiled at the policeman on the dockyard gates.